Heaven on earth. Sounds nice. That's actually been how it is for a number of faith systems before the modern age, and Hermeticism as well. So let's look at that. Now, most of us are familiar with monotheistic leanings that separate heaven and earth. They put heaven in some realm apart from us, or they relegate it to the end of historical time. And it's something that we have to strive for, that we have to be worthy of. And in doing this and making this move, it makes priests and religious authorities first, because they automatically become the mediatory figures between us and the sacred. And it also disparages the earth. But I'm thinking of accounts I've read of American Indians and other indigenous people in other parts of the world during their conquest by European powers. And a theme that comes up now and then is they'll say that they were confused by the idea that heaven and earth are separate because for them, they're already living in heaven on the earth, right? So is there some sense in which Hermeticism can help us understand this a little bit better, even though for those of us who weren't raised in cultures like that, is there something in our own tradition that can help us with this? So just as heaven and earth are not separated in this way of thinking, neither are the sacred and the material. And so let me give you a quotation from Corpus Hermeticum, Book 6, that gets at some of this. The supreme good permeates abundantly. So we're not dealing with a scarcity religion. We're dealing with abundance. We're dealing with the sacred being available anytime, anywhere, all the time. The supreme good permeates abundantly. In this way, the cosmos is good. And the same book also says that this kind of goodness, not so much cosmically, but humanly, can be ill used. And this is one of the sources of evil. Greed is an example. Trying to own everything, using up resources, turning the earth into a trash heap. Now later, in the Corpus Hermeticum also, there's a comment that says that the things of the cosmos are not good. We have to read this in context and in translation, because there's a way in which the text was translated into English that misses an essential meaning in that particular phrasing. So the word for good there is to agathon, which means something like the ultimate good, the divine good. And so the idea is that the divine, big mind, God, the one, whatever we want to call it, transcends the material universe even while expressing itself in the material universe. So the cosmos is good, but it's not the same as God. That's what they're trying to get at with that. They're not saying the cosmos is not good. So the definitions of Hermes Trismegistus add a little bit to this. And they say, nothing is uninhabited by God, for where heaven is, God is too. And where the world is, heaven is. God is in heaven, and heaven is in the world. That's where they're coming from with this. And then one other quotation here from Book 12. Nothing is contemplate then the beautiful arrangement of the world and see that it is alive, and that all matter is full of life. We talked about that in the video called Everything Lives. That's an essential piece of the Hermetic project, is investigating the aliveness of everything. Also an essential piece of Terra psychology as well. So in this understanding, it's as though surfaces, and I'm thinking of Islamic wisdom traditions like Sufism that also talk about this, other traditions too, the Jewish tradition also talks about it, Judaism, that there's a surface reality and material reality, but that it also functions as a symbol. that it can be interpreted, that we can see archetypal reality behind it through the eye of imagination, through nous, to say it in a Hermetic way. That ordinary things reveal themselves, to use Spinoza's phrase, under the aspect of eternity. So that to a properly sensitized consciousness, everything is miraculous. Now, it might be inconvenient to go through the world thinking that everything is miraculous, because there are some things that belong in our life and some things that don't. There are some things we have to keep and some things we have to get rid of. But so it's not, don't imagine it as this constant state of blissing out. It's more that we understand the design behind things, that we gain an intuitive sense of why this means something, not just in terms of ourselves, which is kind of an Emersonian way of holding it, but also in terms of itself. This thing means something to itself as well as to us. So in having this kind of consciousness, this kind of gnosis, we live in a world of sacred presences rather than just a mundane, boring existence. As the definitions of Hermes talk about it, nature is the mirror of truth. And also another quotation, the generous nature of this world teaches all beings. The generous nature of this world teaches all beings. So here we come to what I think of as Hermeticism 2.0. And as we go, I'm going to be using this term more and more. If we were to think about Hermeticism as an ecological path, as well as a spiritual and a wisdom path, we might need a different name for it, or maybe we don't. I don't know. My particular version of this, and I recommend that everybody have their own version if you're interested in this. It's not a doctrine, right? It's not one thing to do for everybody. My version of it, I think of as terra gnosis. That for me is Hermeticism 2.0, and I'm going to be talking about it in other videos as we go, but some differences between terra gnosis and traditional Hermeticism. One difference is that it uses more of our contemporary language of ecology and support for the environment. I don't like that term at all, but you get what I mean. Nature, place, earth, animals, insects, the elements. Hermeticism evolved in a time and place where the planet wasn't in a massive ecological crisis that we might not survive. So the Hermeticism that we do today must be able to see heaven in the world in the light of that disaster. How can we do that? So that's one update that needs to happen. Another one would be the gendered language that we keep running into, where God is talked about as he, mostly because of the translation. That's not part of core Hermetic ideas about the divine. So all that needs to go away too. And there's other things I'll deal with as we go on. So in terms of heaven on earth, I mentioned in a previous video that Hermetic science and spirituality can go together. They're not necessarily in any kind of conflict, that it's really scientism and religious literalism that are fighting things out, and they will never reconcile, because literalism commits you to the idea of, you know, a literal father God who's actually a kind of cosmic daddy and who punishes you for sins or whatever he does in your particular faith system, versus scientism, which is the ideology that only what we can calculate and measure is real knowledge, which is nonsense. So of course, these are fundamentalisms that are always going to battle the way fundamentalisms do. But we can have a wider view through the Hermetic lens. And when we do, we find some astonishing parallels between things like the Big Bang and the Hermetic account of the creation of the world, if we hold that symbolically rather than literally. So I wanted to give you an example of that by way of the idea of heaven on earth, that the sacred presence that we can sense through nous and gnosis begins right at the start, that the cosmos is permeated with presence. So listen to this. I've taken a couple of quotations from the Corpus Hermeticum and put them together. This is all from book 3 though. A holy light was sent forth at the very beginning of things, right? A holy light was sent forth, and the elements from the watery substance solidified under the earth. So if we think of watery substance as the plasma that was present during what Brian Swim calls the primal flaring forth, in other words, the Big Bang, and that the planets grew solid, then we may or may not see some parallels. All of this is distinguished by fire and light, and then the stars make an appearance, which they do in the cosmological account. And the stars, in both accounts, create everything. So, quote, each God sent forth by his own power what had been appointed to him. There came into being four-footed animals, reptiles, fish and fowl, all prolific seed and herb in the shoot of every flower. The gods, in other words, the stars, sent forth the generations of men so that they should know the works of God and be active witnesses of nature, so that men should survey heaven, the paths of the heavenly gods, the works of God and the activity of nature, the signs of what is good, the power of God in the turning fate of every good and evil thing, and discover all the marvelous works of good men. For nature is also seated in God. That's from the Corpus Hermeticum. There's also a part too where in the Kore Cosmo, where God is talking to nature and says, arise. And then it says, from his word there came forth a marvel, feminine, possessed of perfect beauty, gazing at which the gods, the stars, stood all amazed. And God honored her and bade her be prolific. And God rejoiced, this is all from the Kore Cosmo, God rejoiced when seeing that these works moved, and filling full his hands, which held as much as all surrounding space, with all that nature had produced, and squeezing tight the handfuls, said, take these, holy earth, take those, all honored one, who are to be the mother of all things, and henceforth lack nothing. And then God opens his hands and pours blessing into the earth itself. It's a beautiful image. And I'll leave you with something that comes from a different source. It's a tale, a creation tale from the Wyatt tribe in California, that this piece from the Kore Cosmo always reminds me of. In the Wyatt telling, at the beginning, the creator spreads forth the creator's hands and all of existence comes into being. And the tale tells us that no matter how crazy we become, no matter how irrational and destructive we are, not once has the creator ever felt tempted to close his hands and end it.